Peace, 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 y'all. Welcome back to Everlutionary, the podcast. I'm your host, Hawah Kasat. Every episode of my show, I'm out here uncovering inspirational stories about science, mysticism, culture, healing, and the future of humanity. And lately, I can't help but be fascinated by how Bitcoin continues to dominate conversations and news headlines. Look, y'all, if you're not surfing the Bitcoin wave, you definitely have caught glimpses. Bitcoin scorched past 100,000 this month. It has been on a tear. If you haven't heard, the country of El Salvador in South America officially adopted Bitcoin as its legal tender and currency. This happened all the way back in 2021. So if this is the first time you're hearing about it, you're 3 years late. Crazy to imagine. In 2022, more Salvadorians had Bitcoin Lightning wallets than they had bank accounts. Conversations around Bitcoin have largely remained focused on the opportunities for profit and gain. But lately, I've been curious around the metaphysics of Bitcoin. Metaphysics is the study of reality, existence. And so today in my solo episode, I share about my adventuring into the world of Bitcoin and why I decided to do so. And then all the conflicts and hypocrisies I've been encountering along the way. I'm not going to be able to get into all the granularities and contentious points. For example, I know that it's a lot to unpack the huge environmental footprint that producing Bitcoin requires. It's a huge amount of energy to mine Bitcoin, and the emission of fossil fuels does create planetary ecosystem instability. And speaking of instability, the ups and downs in our lives, the chaoticness that sometimes can make you feel like you've lost everything and are drowning. The loss of someone you love, the ending of a relationship, losing your job, feeling heartbroken by things that are out of your control. The feeling that 2024 has been an emotional roller coaster is strikingly similar to the volatile ups and downs of Bitcoin. Is it possible that Bitcoin is mirroring the whiplash of human psychology, our great elation and joy juxtaposed against our deep depression and sorrow? And is there something for us to learn by remaining equanimous, balanced, and not losing our cool and acting like fools when things seem like they've crashed and we have nothing left in our pockets? Is having patience and not reacting impulsively and trusting the process the way for us to unlock how to surf the waves of change? Bitcoin's extreme volatility, to me, it mirrors the emotional aspects of human nature. It's our extreme optimism, which then is followed by our crushing despair, right? It's our moments of exhilaration, which then are followed by our profound fear. The crypto market's sharp fluctuations, they actually reflect, to me, our collective psychological state. They show us that markets are not only driven by logic, but they're driven by human emotion. And so we need to really understand human emotion and speak to it. These cycles are reflective of the larger human condition. Bitcoin's volatility could, for this reason, be a metaphor for the human psyche itself. We're prone to highs and lows. We're always searching for meaning, and we're often blinded by our greed. Ultimately, though, we all just want stability. So I first got into Bitcoin in 2021, and when I did, I didn't know too much except for one of my best friends was starting to invest heavily into it and would talk about it with me all the time. And I'd been hearing about Bitcoin back in 2013 and 14. I had multiple friends even back then telling me how Bitcoin was the future and get into Bitcoin now. I watched it. I kind of didn't really have time to pay attention. I was never really so into investing in things that I didn't know about, and I didn't have a lot of money to invest either. So there was kind of like two things happening back in like 2015, 2013 when I first started hearing about it. It just wasn't really possible. By 2021, I had some savings and was thinking to myself, well, I don't want to keep missing these critical windows. So I went ahead and I started to get a position into Bitcoin and started to invest some of my savings into Bitcoin right around when it was like 52 or 54. I was kind of feeling the anxiety and the anticipation. It was just climbing. It was at an all-time high. And as somebody that was really new to investing, I've never worked really with stocks much at all. Didn't have a history of knowing when to buy, when to sell. I just was trying to get in so I didn't miss the boat. And so I started to invest a little bit of my savings into Bitcoin. And then over the next year or two, I just saw all the money I had invested into Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. I also bought a bunch of different altcoins. I started to get fascinated by seeing how some coins would just jump 20, 30% in a week. Like, wow, you could really, if you were riding some of these coins and some of these altcoins and some of these waves, there's crazy amounts of rush that you can get from playing your card right or picking a winning horse, so to speak. So I was in 2021 first beginning to invest. And then by 2022, early 2023, all the savings I'd put into cryptocurrency was completely plummeted. I did something interesting though. I decided not to sell my Bitcoin. I had friends that were getting really scared, and rightfully so. And so they were just kind of chopping their losses and taking their losses and just getting out of the market, getting out of cryptocurrency. Some of them losing 50%, 80% of what they had invested in. And I didn't sell anything. I just held it. I just thought to myself, wow, I really messed up. I don't know why I put money into this cryptocurrency stuff. And the portfolio I had was 70%, 80%. It was a shell of what I had put in. And it got to the point where I couldn't even open my Coinbase app or my Binance app, which are these cryptocurrency exchanges, which I was using to invest into cryptocurrency. When I first had invested, I'd open it every day or two. I'd check my balances. I'd get some excitement to see like some cryptocurrencies were increasing. My balances were getting higher. I was like, oh, wow, this is great. And then after about 9 months or a year, I couldn't even bring myself to open the app. It may as well have been deleted from my phone. I couldn't open the app. I couldn't touch it. It was just causing me so much sadness and disappointment and fear and anxiety that like so much of my savings was just completely gone and wiped out. So that went on for like probably 6 months. It was probably 6, 9 months. I just let it sit and I just thought to myself, okay, well, this is what it is, but I'm not going to like sell it because it's already such a big loss. It's not worth selling. I'm just going to let it sit there. And so I let it sit and let it sit. It just kept riding and riding. And then this year, it kind of like earlier this year in 2024, in March or April, I started noticing the balances started increasing again. I got word because, the text and you can follow what's happening on the news. You can start seeing cryptos making a little bit of a comeback. I started opening my app again, just out of curiosity. And I was like, oh, okay, there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. Here it's coming back up. Good thing I didn't sell. I was so glad I didn't sell when it was all dropped and low at its lowest. I learned a big lesson there. The one lesson I learned was, wow, don't buy things when they're at all-time highs. That was like a big lesson. And I don't know if I'm not an investor. I'm not your financial advisor. I just was like, mental note to self, don't buy something when it's at an all-time high. So I let it ride. And in March and April, the balanced portfolio went really high again, back to like normal levels, even like I was making money, but I wasn't selling anything. I didn't take any profits. I just let it all sit. I was just kind of like, I don't know what to do. I mean, do I sell it? Do I hold it? And then it dropped again. And it was like back down into the gutters. And I'm just thinking to myself, wow, this is a roller coaster. I wish I had sold it 2 months ago and I would have made all my money back and maybe even made some money off of the whole exchange. And now I'm back with a really low balance. And now we're here at the wave, and it's called the bull market for those of you that have been following. And this bull market is incredibly curious because we're hitting over $100,000 per Bitcoin. And my portfolio of what I've invested in cryptocurrency is doing way better. And I'm, once again at those crossroads of like, well, what do you do? How tangible is this stuff really? Bitcoin is a representation of something that is really interesting in the human consciousness. And this is what I've been sitting with. And this is what I kind of want to reflect on today, because there's a lot of talk around Bitcoin and the nature of like how it's changing a lot of things. But I also think Bitcoin is really interesting because it's a mirror and a reflection to what's been going on with us as humans, I think emotionally and mentally and spiritually over the past couple of years. I think there's some mild, perhaps long sought after connection with the volatility of Bitcoin, something called the fear and greed index, which I've learned a lot about, and how markets are driven by our fear and by our greed. And when we get really greedy, that's a good time to probably step away. And when we get really afraid and the market's at a low, that's actually probably the best time to buy. And I've been learning a lot about that. I've been kind of just thinking about it, wondering like, why am I even into this stuff? I personally, when I was really young, I've had a really interesting relationship with money. Money was something that I never really wanted. And I know that sounds probably weird because we're kind of all raised to think like, oh, like life is about earning a lot of money and having all the things we can have and accumulating as much as we can accumulate and living that life, But for me, money was a side note. Like money came into my life. I made some really good decisions when I was young. One of those decisions was back in 2003, the house I was living in Washington, D.C. came up for sale and came up onto the market. And because I was living in the house in Washington, D.C., they have something called renter rights. And so the owner of the house had to offer me the house before he sold it and put it on the market. He had to offer the renter the first option to buy. It's called first right of refusal. So here I was, 23 years old, 24 years old, living at a time when banks and lenders were giving out loans to anybody with a heartbeat. Anybody with a pulse was getting a loan from the bank for real estate mortgages and for property. So that was pretty awesome. I had this incredible chance to buy a home because I was a public school teacher in Washington, D.C. I had a D.C. government job. I didn't have a lot of savings at all. I was right out of college. And I was able to get a no income verification loan from a bank to buy this house in Washington, D.C. That single action changed the entire course of my life. Probably it's one of the reasons I was able to put a little bit of money into cryptocurrency just back in 2021 was because of that one action I made in 2003. So 20 years later, that house purchase was paying dividends and it continues to pay dividends in my life. But what was interesting was when I bought that house, I wasn't in the market. I wasn't looking to buy a house. I bought the house because the house was offered to me. Literally, the owner knocked on my door and said, "Hey, you're living here. You have a lease for this property. You want to buy it?" I wasn't in the market. I wasn't looking. It just happened because it found me. And that was kind of been my relationship with money. I could have done a lot of things when I went to college. I could have studied finance. I could have studied economics. I could have been a business person. I'm pretty savvy with business, with numbers, building a nonprofit from scratch for 20 years. That takes some business acumen, but I never went to school for any of that stuff. And it's fun. I have fun with it, but I never have lived life with the desire to be like, oh, what's the occupation I can have to make the most money? Oh, what can I do to earn the most money? What's the route to creating the most profit? That's just not how I've been wired. My whole life, if you listen to my earlier podcast episodes, it's been really shaped by these experiences that I've had overseas in India, living in different parts of the world, traveling to different parts of the world, where I've seen a lot of people living with very little to nothing in terms of the basic necessities and needs of life, running water, electricity, enough food to eat. So I had always been driven with wanting to be someone that could offer hope and serve and somehow create impact to improve the lives of people who didn't have access to things like education and food and running water. And so for me, it wasn't about could I get to Wall Street and could I make $10 million? For me, I was going through college and graduating from college with the desire of thinking like, oh, how can I serve? Like, I want to give back. And making money and like thinking about, oh, a career path that's going to make money, that never really was important to me. When I bought that house, I didn't even believe in home ownership. I was in many ways partly an anarchist in my philosophy and my values. I've always resonated really deeply with the quote, the earth does not belong to us, we belong to the earth. And so I've always had really interesting questions and an interesting relationship with the idea of ownership and property and owning property. I've changed that relationship over the years. My relationship has evolved over the years. And I am more at peace with this idea of having assets, having property, being able to own something, I think is a fundamental human right. And every human should be able to own their own home. I think that would be a beautiful thing for humanity, where we built a world where every human has a right to ownership of their own home, their own piece of land, somewhere they know they can always be safe and belong. So because I want that for other people, I shouldn't keep that for myself. And so I use that reasoning to move me forwards in my own life, in my own pursuit of deciding how my life in service and the public sector, being a nonprofit director, being a public school teacher, being an artist and a poet, how these things were not very lucrative, but I was always frugal enough. I would save enough money. I would find ways to make a little go a long way. And I was really efficient and effective with what I would earn. I didn't spend a lot of money. I would save what I got. And when I saved money, I would save it, put it away for a rainy day, but I would also reinvest it in things that would generate hopefully more opportunities for me in the future. So fast forward to Bitcoin, and here we are in the world of Bitcoin. When I really started thinking about Bitcoin, I was like, well, do I want to buy Bitcoin? Do I want to get into this? Do I even believe in any of these systems? And then I got excited because Bitcoin was just different. This idea of decentralizing investment power and taking the money and moving it from like the centralized ways that banks hold money and having it decentralized in exchange was really exciting to me. I saw it as a way to combat and to disrupt what is a system that is really entrenched and monopolized. And I saw it as a way to demonopolize. And I like that about Bitcoin. And so I thought to myself, wow, this is a fascinating idea to almost like bring money back to the people. And it transcends national borders. It transcends just one country's currency. This is like a global currency, right? The ups and downs of it, of course, the volatility, the way it moves like a roller coaster, it very much mirrors our own human psyche. And that's been really interesting to watch how it impacted me, how it impacts my friends who are also invested in or working with cryptocurrency. I see Bitcoin as something that is impacting human nature at a really deep scale. It's impacting society and it's impacting our collective consciousness. It's an evolution of our value, right? It's like, it's monetary, but it represents a deep shift in how we as humans are conceptualizing wealth, power, and resources. And it could really challenge the traditional notion of value and how we perceive our connection to materialism, because in the past, most currency was pinned to gold, which is a physical, tangible asset. And now you have something that is not physical or tangible. And there's a metaphysical idea here of ownership. Like, what are you really owning? What's being owned? Bitcoin exists in a virtual realm and it's not bounded by physical constraints. Perhaps the biggest physical way that it's connected to us is computers and the blockchain and verifying code to verify each transaction. But, in terms of possessing, what are you possessing? What are you holding? You're holding a transaction. And there's a scarcity model to Bitcoin, which is really, really intriguing to me, and which is another reason why I wanted to get into Bitcoin. As I was learning about Bitcoin, I learned that it wasn't going to just be produced over and over again, that there was going to be a finite number of Bitcoins in the world. That was fascinating to me. The way that Satoshi Nakamoto designed Bitcoin, he made it so that only 21 million Bitcoins would ever be mined or created. Only 21 million. They can never produce more than 21 million Bitcoins unless somebody goes in there and hacks the whole code and decides to open up, I don't know, something somehow. I don't even know if that's possible, but assuming that everything goes as planned by the person who invented this cryptocurrency, there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoins. So there's a finite number of this, which means as time passes, the value of that will just always increase. Of course it will increase because you can't just make more. You can't just print more Bitcoin. So it becomes more and more scarce. It becomes more and more coveted. And in that way, it's just like, it's really fascinating because most currencies, you can just mass produce currencies. You can keep producing more dollars, printing more yuan. Like wherever you are in the world, your country can just print more currency, which I thought was fascinating. And then I just started seeing it as a reflection of the human psyche, the volatility, the price fluctuations, and how like it created emotional extremes for people, the extreme optimism, the extreme crashing, and how this behavior reflects our collective mental states. So in this way, I see Bitcoin as a metaphor for the psychological chaos inherent in our human condition. And is there a way to manage that? I think that's the question. I think as we think about healing and transforming the world, we have to ask, like, what is balance? And is it possible to create balance where volatility is difficult to live in? It's difficult for those that have experienced trauma. It's difficult to be in volatility. So this is something to think about too, is just like, will Bitcoin ever become something that's just stable? And then if it does become stable, how would that mirror or reflect in our human consciousness and our human psyche? So I think it transcends a lot of the central authorities that often lead us into what become coercive situations where one country has a monopoly on the power or the global currency. Bitcoin is a direct threat to that. So a lot of things are changing. A lot of things are going to keep changing as we understand Bitcoin. But for those that are like, do I get in? Do I not get in? How does this affect me? It does affect you. Look, it's going to affect you because it's going to impact global currencies around the world. But most importantly, if you get into Bitcoin, you're going to go on an emotional roller coaster ride because I think it's going to be very unlikely that Bitcoin just stays over 100,000. I think that we will see continued fluctuations. And if you are invested, you're going to see fluctuations in your own heart as your heart sinks when you open your Coinbase app one day and you're like, oh my goodness, I've lost like $3,000 or $30,000. And that's painstaking and really difficult to absorb. And so you got to be really mindful. And then I just think about value, like the value we're creating in the world, it's got to be beyond digital. And it's got to be something that is rooted in community, rooted in land, rooted in protecting our natural resources. Bitcoin to me is only as good as those who wield it. And the people that are holding Bitcoin, the question is, are we just out here being greedy and trying to accumulate and take all that we can for ourselves? Or are we really prioritizing building communities that are rooted in land, rooted in real interactions, rooted in place? Are we farming? Are we growing our own food? Can you eat Bitcoin? No. Can you trade Bitcoin for food? Maybe. Over the next 10 years, sure. I'm sure you'll be buying real estate with Bitcoin. People will be buying cars with Bitcoin. But ideally, in the bigger world, like this metaphysical idea of ownership is one that we just keep getting stuck on as humans. As artificial intelligence and AI continues to move at exponential speeds of development, we're shifting more to these assets which we can't even eat or drink or live off of, except as a secondary means, as a means to an end. And so I wonder where we're going. I recommend right now, wherever you are, that you think really deeply about that. Where is your water coming from? Where's your food coming from? Are we strengthening our food systems, our water systems? These are the things that seem really important. And Bitcoin does unlock some important questions around personal sovereignty and wealth and building wealth. But how much are we asking the questions around building wealth? And if building wealth is all we are trying to do, then how are we potentially being selfish? And how is our selfishness preventing us from building a world where everyone can really access and have a level of comfort in their lives that doesn't require them to work 2 or 3 jobs? These are the questions for me. Human nature, this says a lot about human nature because it's another opportunity to ask ourselves, like, the concentration of wealth, this idea of accumulating as much as we can, does it hurt us or does it help us? And in the long run, where does it take us? Where does it get us? And what are we hoping to achieve? I think we all change a lot as we get older. We have different ways that we have to relate to our own lives, our families. Our responsibilities change as we have kids. So there's no easy answer. There's no right or wrong in the moment. But asking the hard questions is what it's all about. And I think society often has us feeling like we need to get ours first, meaning like this nation first idea, my country before your country, my needs before your needs. It's always about like what I can do for myself. And I think if we start flipping that, the values, the culture, we start flipping that a little bit and start thinking like, how can I be benefiting the community? How can I be benefiting the collective? I think that's a beautiful thought to take into 2025. I think that's the thought. That's the value. Hold that up. What are you doing in your life that's not just about making more money? If you are inspired, share this with a friend that is interested in cryptocurrency. And as you collect or invest or sell off whatever you're buying or holding, just keep in mind that it's something beyond us and bigger than us. Just keep in mind that every action is impacting everyone around us. All right, peace and blessings. Everlutionary, restoring balance and healing the natural world, is brought to you by me, Hawah Kasat. If you would like to find out more about me and my story, head to hawah.us. That's HAWAH.US. And then make sure to search for me in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you for listening. Stay in touch. Peace.